We are recording, so hopefully we'll have the sessions later on for you to view as well. I know there's going to be a lot of content that's going to be kind of gone over. One of the big things with the focus of tonight's event with the whole lightning talks is it's a very focused format. So the idea is each individual speaker has prepared something that they're going to be speaking about. To be completely honest with you, the speakers are highly qualified. Some of the most amazing people that I know and that I'm shocked even agreed to do this. So very, very happy to have them here. And kind of when you notice the format, it's like 10 to 15 minutes per session. So there's not going to be a ton of time for fluff. There's not going to be a ton of time for filler. It's going to be very direct to the point content. So I hope you walk away, because I truly value your time and the fact that you're here. I truly hope you walk away today saying, I just learned something new. This session was totally worth the time. And hopefully you'll be back for another one. If I'm going to ask y'all to do two things. Number one, I've already seen some of the chat where I've seen some people come out from Free Code Camp Houston and all those good groups. And I saw someone mention GDG Houston, which is amazing. Please let me know where you are joining us from, number one, because it kind of helps us get a better idea of where the attendees are. But number two, please let me know the current technologies either that you're using or the technologies that you're trying to learn, maybe have a blocker or something along that line. Just drop that in the chat. I'm going to be reading through it all. I'm going to be engaging in the chat as well. But hey, we got Florida in the house. I see that already. Do you have Yeah, I do have the speaker order, and I put it in the admin channel if you look at that. Rescript all the way. Michigan. Okay, so this is definitely a more broader audience than I was expecting initially. We got some Plano. We got some Memphis, Tennessee, Fort Worth. I see Bridgeport. We got Ghana in the house. Ghana. We reached Ghana, y'all. And we got Rowlett, Texas. We got Arizona. We got all these people joining from FCC Dallas, which I love. We got the MERN stack. I think is a very popular stack that I think a lot of people, especially if you're going the bootcamp route or the self-taught route, it's usually a very safe area for a lot of people to kind of go into. And of course, if you're learning MERN, React is kind of right up there for you. But I also want to implore y'all, don't always just go for necessarily the languages that you kind of see social media push or a lot of these boot camps push. One thing that I often tell folks, and I'm kind of saying this here because I noticed as I'm gazing through some of these names that some of the people in here are absolute beginners. Some of them I have engaged with on other Discord channels or Twitter. So I know they're at the very beginning stages. Please, I say this all the time, and I really, really hope to emphasize this to you. Please, don't just go off of what social media kind of tells you to follow. Do a little bit of research. Find out what the local demand is in your market. I always say it's always great to kind of aspire and hope to get a remote opportunity. But one thing that I've said for years and years and years, if you learn the local demands of your market, you're never going to run out of opportunities. And sometimes doing a little bit of research and finding out what's in demand in your area can be the one thing that separates you from a lot of other candidates. And also one of the biggest factors of you being local is it's a lot easier to onboard a junior developer that is local than one that's in a remote capacity that they're trying to train up. Sometimes leveraging that local experience could be the way that you kind of hit another stride. So even I was at a meetup literally on Tuesday talking to somebody who's learning how to code, and a big language that's in demand in the Dallas market is Java, where it didn't even cross their mind to kind of learn that thing. So sometimes doing a little bit of research can be a big opening to helping you kind of learn and grow and all the good stuff. So with that being said, I don't want to take up all the time, but hopefully that gave you something actionable to think about through the rest of these talks. I am going to open this up to the very first speaker. His name is Jesse Hall. So Scott, if you can give Jesse Hall the opportunity to speak first.
I'm here.
There we go. All right. And I'm going to mute this here, and I will now give the floor to Jesse.
Do I have the ability to share my screen, please?
I think, yeah, you got to give it to him.
Yeah. It says the screen sharing is disabled.
Can you try it again?
There we go. There we go. I can now. Yes, perfect. Awesome. So if anybody can bring people together, it's Danny. So thank you so much for having me. So I'm going to talk about what's new with Next.js 13. I think that Next.js is the full stack framework for React.js. And so this is going to be like a 10-minute version of Next.js Conf. So after Next.js Conf, there was so much confusion, honestly, because of so much hype and all the features that were announced. And so hopefully in the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to clear up some of that confusion And so I'm Jesse Hall. I'm a senior developer advocate at MongoDB. You might also know me from YouTube as Code Stacker. And I do live in Texas. I live in East Texas, in the middle of nowhere between Houston and Dallas. So again, like I said, there was a bunch of cool announcements for Next.js 13. We have the new app directory. We're starting to use React server components, component-based data fetching, turbo pack, improved next image, next link, and the new next font. So some of these announcements were improvements to stable features in Next 12. Some of them were experimental features from Next 12 that moved to stable, and some of them are new experimental features. It's these new experimental features that are causing some confusion regarding the release of Next 13. Some are thinking that Next 13 has breaking changes, huge breaking changes that makes it not ready for production, but that's very far from the case. Upgrading from Next 12 to 13 is actually smooth and painless. There's no major breaking changes, but there are a bunch of new experimental features that you can incrementally opt into if you want to. So let's go over a few of these. And we're going to start with the stable feature upgrades first. So the image component. This upgrade has some great improvements. You're going to notice initially after upgrading that if you have any images without an alt tag, that you're going to get an error. So alt tags are now required by default, and this is great. This is a good thing. It improves accessibility. You're also going to notice if you look at the code here, if you're importing a local image, you no longer have to specify the width and the height of the image. I think that's a game changer for me. It's just one less thing to think about that will automatically be calculated for you. But if you are linking to a remote image, you will still need to specify that width and height. And this is going to prevent layout shifts. And so this new image component ships less client-side JavaScript. It's faster. It prevents layout shift automatically. But one thing to note is that it is technically a new image component. And so if you want to continue using the image component that was in Next 12, then you will need to run this code mod here, which will go through all of your code, and it will change your next image imports to next legacy image. So that's just if you want to use the old image component, which I don't know why you would want to. The new one works just great. So the link component also had a minor upgrade. You no longer have to manually add an anchor tag as a child in a link. So here we have this anchor about within the link. We don't have to do that anymore. We can just take that anchor out and just put about in there. So minor improvement, but it's great. And again, there is a code mod for this after you upgrade. Just run this code mod and it will go through all of your existing links and take those anchors out for you. So pretty easy. Now onto some of the experimental features that you can opt into if you want to. Just keep in mind that these features are not stable. The functionality could change over time and there could be bugs. So use at your own risk. The first one is the new app directory. So this is in beta. It's not recommended for production. And eventually this could replace the pages directory. There's no mention anywhere as to if or when that will happen. So you can continue using the pages directory and try out the app directory if you want to. But what do we get with this? So first of all, we get layouts. We can easily share UI between routes, preserving state, and avoiding re-renders. We'll start using React server components. So you're going to find that a lot of your existing components are now going to be considered server components. So they're going to be rendered on the server, and this is going to be the default for Next.js going forward. We also have streaming. So we're going to be able to instantly display parts of our page that don't require data, and then suspend other components that are maybe further down the page, or they're fetching data. So this is going to make our pages responsive or interactive much quicker. And then lastly, we have new ways of fetching data in the app directory. We have async server components and component level fetching. So let's dive a little bit deeper into each of these, starting out with the layouts. So the app directory adopts a folder-based routing structure, and it makes it easy to lay out complex interfaces. So to get started with the app directory, you just have to add a page.js file in the app folder. If there is no app folder, you can just add an app folder at the root, add a page.js file, and that's now going to be the top level route for your application. And now along with that, you can also add a layout.js file, and this is going to define a shared UI between multiple pages. So if you have a header, a nav bar, sidebar, something that you want to share between pages, between routes, you can do that as well at the top level, and it will flow down to the pages below it. There are also multiple other special files that you can include. We talked about page.js, layout.js. There's also loading.js, error, template, and head. And so just a quick note here, you don't have to choose between the app folder and the pages folder. It's not all or nothing. You can continue using the pages directory along with the app directory and then slowly migrate your application over. So that's really cool. Now, another thing with the app folder is server components like we talked about. By default, all components are server components. So that means that they will be rendered on the server instead of the client. So if you need interactivity, event listeners, state, life cycle effects, then you'll need to make the component a client component. So to do that is very easy. Just add the use client directive at the top of the file. So now this file would be rendered on the client, and now we can use any interactivity or any other event listeners or other features that we want on the client side. And then we also have streaming like we talked about. So we'll be able to progressively render content on the screen. We can immediately render that content that doesn't require any data, and then slowly show a loading state for any other parts while it's fetching. And then when the data comes in, go ahead and render those components. So this means that our users can interact with the page much faster instead of waiting for everything to load. Now, there's nothing that you have to do to enable this as long as you are using the app directory. Again, these are features that come along with using the app directory. And lastly, with the app directory, we have a new way of fetching data. So the terms SSG, SSR, ISR, you can kind of throw those out really. You can now just fetch data inside your layouts, your pages, your components. And Next.js handles the fetching, the caching, and the revalidating for you. So really cool things in the app directory. I'm looking forward to the continuing changes. Again, it's in beta, but give it a try. Next, we have the Next.js introduces this brand new font system. And so this automatically optimizes your fonts, including custom fonts. It removes external network requests that it will improve privacy and performance. It has built-in automatic self-hosting for any font files, and it has zero layout shift. So the whole Google font issues that we had earlier in the year with privacy, we don't have to worry about that with this. You can easily use Google fonts or any other font with performance and privacy in mind. So what happens here is on build, the font gets downloaded and hosted on the server. And so there's no need for the client to fetch fonts from any third party. So that's really cool. And so the last feature that we're going to talk about is the most controversial announcement at Next.js Conf, and that was the introduction of TurboPack. So Vercel has touted this to be the successor to Webpack. It has a very long way to go, obviously, to surpass Webpack, but it seems like it has a lot of potential. It's Rust-based. According to the benchmarks that we were given, it looks very fast. So we'll see, we'll see where it goes. But TurboPack is only in alpha, and you have to opt in Next.js 13 to use it. So out of the gate, it's not enabled in Next 13. You can currently only use it in development and not in a production build. So again, it's in alpha. It's got a long ways to go, but it is really cool and has a lot of potential. So we'll see where that goes. A lot of people were thinking that you had to use TurboPack with Next.js 13, but you don't have to. You can give it a try, but it will work just the same as everything did in Next 12 if you don't want to use it. And so hopefully I was able to clear up some of the confusion with the announcements at Next 13. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you all for having me. I think that was about 10 minutes.
To be honest, I literally was taking notes. I was typing stuff up. I was like, I got to look into this. I think big kudos, by the way. Y'all, please, if you can, drop some love in the chat for Jesse. That was beyond incredible, very concise. I loved it. I'll be honest, you gave me two specific things that I'm going to be looking into probably later on tonight, because we are using Next.js at work, and this could be, I think that's phenomenal. One thing that I'll say, Jesse, I'm going to be dropping your social links as well as everybody else's on the chat very soon. If you can, and I'm going to ask all the speakers to do this, whatever social media profiles that you want me to share out, please, share that with me. But number two, if you can, like your slide deck right now, if you could tweet it out so that way people can, check it out on their own time. That way they can have a reference. I think that would be very valuable as well.
I can do that, no problem.
Perfect. All right. One thing that I'm going to ask everybody, right? Because one of the best things about being at a meetup is not just the technical content, but it's meeting folks and connecting and networking. please drop your socials in the chat. Give everybody a chance to kind of connect and build that network out. If you see somebody that kind of has some posts that you like, that, you know, shares it and all that good stuff, connect. I think that's a perfect opportunity to do that. So if you want to drop a LinkedIn link or a Twitter link or something like that, please, everybody, knock yourself out, drop it in the chat. I think we can all connect that way. Maybe have somebody you can kind of have a conversation with later about being at the exact same meetup and learning about Turbo and Next.js, right? So that's a great way to kind of connect. I see the chat is already on fire. People were ready. They apparently, I just unleashed it all. There you go. You got a bunch of folks that you can connect with. So kind of go through, and if you see somebody that's maybe local in your area or something that you can connect about, I highly, highly recommend you doing so. And the reason why I'm telling you to do that now, by the way, is we still have the rest of the meetup where you can kind of go open profiles and connect. So it gives you a little bit of homework on the side as well if you want to do that. All right, perfect. So we're going to kind of go to the next speaker now. Jesse, once again, seriously, thank you. That was a great talk. The next speaker that we have going up is already up. So that's perfect. Brent, did I just get made host? I just got made host. Okay, go ahead. Oh, you have to unmute.
Oh,
there you go.
Yeah, there
Perfect.
I am.
All right,
Perfect.
go for it.
All right, yeah, thanks for the invite, Danny, and also shout out to the Dallas Free Code Camp. I've got so many connections to Free Code Camp. Had an opportunity to meet Quincy a few times back in the day when I was first getting started. Also, I had learned the code on my own, started Free Code Camp like right before I got my job. So it was like very early days, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. But I did want to mention, I was actually born in Dallas, Fort Worth. My uncle lives in Fort Worth, right next to the baseball stadium. And yeah, so it's nice to have this connection to literally the hometown. But anyway, BWO is what I go by on Twitter. BDougie is what I go by on the internet. Brian Douglas is my government name. And I'm going to talk about TRPC, so building full stack apps. So it kind of rolls right next, like pretty good into what Jesse was just talking about. Also, big fan of Code Stacker, and I see a lot of familiar faces. Jacob, see you over there hanging out. Looking forward to your talk. But yeah, TRPC, that's the subject. Like, just Google it after or find the docs, and it'll be helpful, hopefully, in your career. So I'm gonna jump right in. I had watched a documentary called The Last Dance back in 2020. It was so inspirational. The GOAT, the greatest of all time, Michael Jordan. It was about his last season before he retired the first time, because he retired 2 more times after that. But what I'm getting at, in the documentary, they were trying to identify like what made Michael Jordan the best. And this is a bit of a joke, because I gave this talk at QCon and Theo was in the room. So I made the pun of him being the Michael Jordan of dev content. But I bring this up because a lot of people don't realize Michael Jordan spent a lot of time practicing and he got really good at the game. But what he got good at is patterns and understanding, like, when you see a certain situation, you know what to do next. So there's a book called Sprawl Ball. Area 31 inside Sprawl Ball, it puts statistics to the game of basketball. 31% of shots on the court at this point right here go in. So if you know 31% of the shots go in at this point, the next thing you do is you orchestrate your entire framework and your play around that point. So when we talk about choosing frameworks or languages, and like Danny was saying, pick stuff that's in the market. Like if Java is hot, learn Java. If you know Next.js, maybe you don't know this, but 50% of all deployed sites that use React are Next.js. 71% of all front-end apps are React. So if you know that is what's the skill, like, start orchestrating your career around that. I was benefited that I worked on a React project in 2015. As React started getting mature, my entire career was built on top of React. Like, because I happened to learn at a good time, every job after that became easier. Now, I say that right now, 10 years later, well, 2013, almost 10 years later, actually 8 years later. But what I'm getting at is, like, there might be something else that's up and coming, like TRPC, that you might want to hit your career to. Not guaranteed, past performance is not prediction for future growth, but let me jump into this. Okay, so picking tech is hard. There's so much out there. If Jesse's telling you to use Next.js, if Danny's saying to do Java, like, take some advice. We're not on Twitter. We can take advice here in the Free Code Camp meetup, so do that. I'd also say choose a framework. Like, if you know 31% of shots or 31% of the resumes that have this skill set on is going to get you that job, do it. Like, learn it, spend some time, but focus. Like don't like Michael Jordan was focused on being a good power forward and sometimes a guard, but don't go like practice center when you should be practicing forward moves and you should be being a guard. So sorry, I apologize that if y'all aren't into basketball, I don't have a lot of time to go into the details of basketball and Michael Jordan, but I do a lot of this type of content. I speak at conferences, and I have a YouTube channel that I'm going to revive in like the next week or so. So I'll be going into way more detail about this stuff in the future. But Brian Douglas is my name. I actually started a company called Opensauced to find places to contribute in open source. It was a whole nother talk, but just want to share this because we just recently did insights into DigitalOcean's Hacktoberfest, identifying spam and contributions and trends. So that's the product. We'll be launching a private beta tomorrow, and then hopefully an open beta at the end of the year. So I mentioned that because we chose Next.js as well. I started with this project 6 months ago. As a solo person, I ended up getting and convincing a couple engineers to join me and do this. And we started doing some exploration and building our API, but also building our front end. And during this exploration, I actually ran into Theo out here in San Francisco, and he had pitched me doing TRPC. And my whole operation of building APIs has always been the Jamstack. So I run a podcast called Jamstack Radio, and I'm really into doing stuff where you could separate concerns, but also use tools that are free or really cheap to use. So Jamstack basically separates your server from your client and separates the concerns. So like if you want peanut butter, you have peanut butter. If you have jam, you have jam. And I usually approach this using GraphQL. So I'm just going to mention a bunch of stuff that you could just like Google and like save for later and explore. To do REST APIs, I use a tool called Swagger or Open API, and that's what we did for Opensauced. But during this exploration, during the summer, after we built the product for DigitalOcean and Hacktoberfest, I wanted to do more exploration. So this is where we start talking about TRPC. So TRPC is like, it's pretty new. It's a couple, like 18 months old, maybe a couple years old. It adds TypeScript into the mix. The RPC, so T is TypeScript, RPC is remote procedure call. And this is really, you don't have to commit this memory. It's not a college course, but this is how you consume the data from the back end to the front end. Now, this completely broke my brain when I started looking at this because it looked like how I wrote code 10 years ago, where you had Express.js or a server, then you had your front end app, which was probably some jQuery mess. That's what I did 10 years ago. And that's what it kind of looks like, where you're just writing JavaScript functions. So no longer do you have to separate your concerns of, I have to build an API and I have to build a structure and front end. It actually just does it all to glue together. And the magic is the TRPC router. And I don't have time to go into details of how the router works, but it is the glue to allow you to write JavaScript on the front end and the back end. And when I say JavaScript, I really mean TypeScript, but it does compile to JavaScript, and TypeScript is definitely worth checking out. The beauty of this is like you get the full-on sandwich. So as soon as you run the script to start your own TRPC app, you have front end, back end, full stack application ready to go. And as long as you know how to interact with JavaScript, you can now have production ready apps out of the box. This is the beta site for the docs. So I think it looks so much better. The original site, create.t3.gg. This is a framework to get started really quickly. And it's worth trying. So if you have an idea for building some CRUD application to consume data from I don't know, well, the example that comes out of create the community is like the Roundus is like the example that gets shown a lot. It's how do you compare round Pokemon. But what I'm getting at is like, if you have a side project or an idea, or you're learning something new, try the script. You'll be kind of amazed on how much work it does for you out of the box. Obviously, when you're attached to a framework that was already built before you came along, you do want to go back and learn stuff as you go back, as you progress. But just note that this gives you a lot of stuff out of the box for free. The reasons it's called T3, and I completely flubbed mentioning the framework's called T3, so create T3 app. This is what includes TRPC, but also includes some other stuff out of the box. So the three T's, TypeScript, Tailwind, TRPC, are the three T's, but in reality, the T3 is actually, it's a shorthand for Theo's gamer tag. Because in reality, it actually gives you so much more out of the box. So Prisma, so where Next.js gives you a full stack framework to build Next.js apps, T3 gives you a meta framework on top. So meta frameworks are things that give you more. It also gives you more opinions too as well. So like if I join the team as a 12th man on a squad on the NBA, like there's already a framework. I'm not trying to make decisions. I'm here to like make sure I can level up myself as a player or a dev. So it does give you next off as well as Prism out of the box. And there's a lot of decisions made. I have a demo of the CLI working. This is really the point where I do a live demo, but because of time, I won't do that. But I just wanted to show you just running the script. It gives you an option to choose whether you want next off, Prisma, Tailwind, TRPC, including the application. Next, you don't get to choose. Next comes along for the ride. But now you're giving a full stack framework, full stack application within seconds. So you're making a bunch of decisions. Now you have an app. And then when you run npm start or npm run dev on this is what you get. You get a generic title and some copy. And I did this for QCon as well. This was my example. QCon, that text right there, I'll just show you in a sec. I already mentioned the router is the secret sauce, but out of the box, you get a TRPC server. The server is your backend. That's your API. And then you get a client. And this is your next app. So the client itself will be in a pages folder, just as Jesse had just shown. In Next 13, it will be an app folder. But for the context of TRPC and create T3 app, it is going to be in the pages folder. So this heads up, and that hopefully that won't trip you up too much. So sorry, I couldn't click the next slide. So your backend looks like this. This is a schemaless API development. So if you are coming from a free code camp, or if you're coming from just learning React yesterday because you watch a YouTube video, as long as you have that context and that context around JavaScript, you should be able to like be dangerous in this right away. And that's the purpose of this as well. So under your serval, once you run the script, you'll get an example.ts, and it'll look like this. I don't have time to go through every single line, but just know that's the sort of the dummy code you get to set up that one server I showed you. And then your front end, I'm just sort of highlighting hello from QCon. That context is here. So you're actually consuming the backend server API just as if you were to consume from a function. So there's no extra mental cognition that you have to know or learn. Just know you're importing JavaScript functions, and then you can present that inside of a React component just as so. So the beauty of this is like it, and this is what really tripped me up because I've been doing React since 2014. I've been doing React. I figured there was like some sort of tutorial or just some sort of explanation I had to like get through. And the real beauty of T3 app is that you just do it. Like you run the script, you have an app ready to go, and you jump in. And the beauty of that is like I was talking to Theo about this because he's running a company, and one of his engineers, they specifically were a career switcher. They were a ramen chef, and when he was working full time as an engineer with Theo and his co-founders, Theo actually asked him like, "Hey, can you add a new endpoint to do X, Y, Z?" And when he answered that question, he's like, I actually don't know what an endpoint is. Like the ramen chef is like, I'm a full-time engineer working at this company. I don't know what an endpoint is. And the reason for that is because in TRPC, everything's a function. So you don't have to have that sort of extra learning about how APIs work. You can just ship application code production ready out the door as quick as possible. So obviously that ramen chef is going to learn what APIs are eventually. But the beauty of this is like you can now onboard new engineers in like a different way. And so just wanted to mention this as like a quick little walkthrough of T3 app and TRPC and building applications, because this framework, it does all the work for you. What's beautiful about this is like this same pattern is now being introduced in Next 13 and how data is consumed from the backend with these they call them React hooks, but consuming data in React hooks, it follows a very similar pattern. We're just taking away that cognitive load of like, how do I consume my data? Do I need to have an entire Apollo or Urkel or something to consume GraphQL? No, you just import the JavaScript function. Very similar. So I think the future of React is going, and JavaScript is it's a wonderful place, and I look forward to seeing more of that stuff. So I'll skip through some of this stuff, just reminding, choose a framework, like step into the game and start playing right away. Like don't spend your entire time scrubbing through docs, through a bunch of stuff. Like on demand, just in time learning is how I accomplished. I was also a career switcher. I don't think I mentioned that earlier, but went through an online program, got my first job like after doing sales for 4 years. And I just stepped into the framework at that time was Ruby on Rails. And that's what I love about this. So if you're interested in getting involved in open source, hotopensauce.pizza is this thing I've been working on. That's the API that we were building. Check it out. There is a video that Theo has out there about GraphQL and TRPC, so definitely check that out. Also, I have a YouTube channel that I've been working on for the past 6 months, Opensauced. And I added the slide as Jesse was talking. I did a podcast last year with Tobias about Webpack, and he's the guy who created TurboPack. So if you want to hear a story about a year ago when he accepted a job at Vercel and what he was doing before, highly recommend that. I think a lot of folks don't really know the story exists, but we recorded a podcast twice. First time was Webpack was dying, basically, and 2 weeks later he announced he was joining Vercel. And then it was a better podcast we re-recorded about, hey, open source wins. You got a new job at Vercel. Tell us about that story. So definitely check it out. And yeah, that's my Twitter handle.
Thank you. I thought that was killer. I took some screenshots. So, I had to take a screenshot. For those that don't know, Theo is a pretty awesome human being. Definitely someone that I can call a friend that I aggravate quite often and vice versa. So pretty happy to be knowing that everybody's in good company there. Once again, I'm going to ask B. Dougie to do the same thing. If he can tweet out his slide deck so that way anybody can kind of reference it and go to his Twitter to kind of check that out. If you go to my Twitter profile right now, I'm taking points of each speaker, so you'll be able to find all of their handles as well. So that way you can kind of look at their docs as well. One thing I want to make a call out for, if you are in the Dallas area, we have our next meetup that we announced. In case you haven't seen it, I'm going to drop the link for that in the chat. And it is a session that I've done, basically, we've done Free Code Camp Dallas. I've approached hundreds of hiring managers, recruiters, developers around Dallas area and invited them. We have an amazing star-studded panel of technical recruiters, hiring managers. I see the message. You name it, we've got it. We have a panel of amazing people, and the goal is to help you get a job in tech. The other goal is to give you actionable strategies that you can utilize to really increase your chances of being a standout candidate. As we all know, there's some layoffs going on now, so I know a lot of beginners have been kind of blowing up my mentions in that regard. I've done a lot of talking on that, but the one thing that I'll say as far as layoffs go is it shouldn't necessarily be a reason to scare you off from learning. You don't need to stop learning, you need to start preparing. And this is kind of a great way to get you in the right mindset to prepare for when Q1 of 2023 is over with. A lot of companies are going to be hiring way more than they're hiring now because the recession theoretically should be eased up to where companies can start hiring again. And they're going to need developers to solve problems. We want to help you kind of get in the right mindset to tackle that. Now, the one thing that I will say with that meetup, it is in person only. We're not going to be streaming it. The ultimate goal is if you show up, you should be able to make some great connections, walk out with a great network, and be able to kind of put yourself in a position to really kind of grow within this local community. We're going to try and do more of these in other cities, but really right now, since I'm in the Dallas community, I got to focus here. But we did this in Memphis. It was a massive success. We had so many people really make great connections. We're doing the same thing here. Hopefully we can do that somewhere else. If you're somewhere near the Dallas area, it might be worth the trip to kind of check out. That's completely up to you, but we're going to be doing that in person. But also, if you're in the Commit Your Code Discord, which is the Discord community that I've been a part of for a very long time, amazing admin team there as well. We will be doing a lot more like globally focused events there. So I highly recommend checking that out. If you're not part of that, check out my Twitter bio. There's a link in my bio that you can join. We have now completely over 12,000 developers from all over the world in there, and we just kind of give coding help and all the good stuff, so definitely recommend that as a resource. But if you're in the Dallas area, highly recommend making sure that you join our Discord, the Free Code Camp Dallas Discord. You can get there by going to fcc-dallas.com. I'll drop the link for that below as well, but if you checked out that meetup link as well, you'll see the link to our website with all of our socials and our Discords, our Facebook groups, and all that other good stuff as well. What we're going to do now before we go to the next speaker is I kind of mentioned to y'all at the beginning of this that we have COVID.
There we
By
go.
all the smiles, I'll say people feel me on this one.
Nope.
Is Jacob still here? Because I see him on my screen. Okay, there we go. That's progress.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Cass. I am hold on, let me start my slideshow.
Yeah, we'll start that first.
There we go. Hey, I am Cass. I am a front-end
You're not showing
developer.
your screen.
Oh, I'm not. I thought it was. 1 second.
That's
There.
cool. Perfect.
Okay, there you go. I'm Cass. Today I'll be talking about some very basic tips and tricks for responsive web design. First, a little bit about me. I am a front-end developer originally from Mexico, then moved to San Antonio when I was 6. Now I'm living in Houston. I also lived in Fort Worth. So I've just kind of been all over Texas. Texas is me. Currently I am working fully remote at an agency where we build really neat, products and such as like different games, survey platforms. I'm building something for DocuSign right now. We've built stuff for like Microsoft. It's been really fun. All sorts of just like different cool, weird projects. That's what I like to do. I am a self-taught developer. I started learning when my mom needed a website. I figured, sure, how hard could this be, right? Like, it really just started with, I wonder how you can make a button, and just spiraled into a full-blown obsession, which I'll show you right now. My favorite thing to do would be to create CSS art. So just like images made out of HTML and CSS. Why? For fun. That's it. I enjoy it. They're also responsive. And yeah, let's see, here's one with JavaScript, and it's an SVG with JavaScript. Here's a scroll animation I did that I love it. So yeah, that's pretty much me. So let's get started with different responsive tips and tricks. Okay, so number 1 would be to avoid setting fixed sizes. I learned this the hard way, and it really sucks, but it's really helpful if you let everything just be fluid, right? So I made an example, if I could find it here. There we go. Okay, here we go. So this one is a div with a fixed width of 50 rem units, right? So as you can see here, it begins to overlap, okay? So now instead I recommend doing max width instead of just width. If you do max width, you'll see here that it's still the same size here on your large screen, but if you make it smaller, it's flush with your screen. It doesn't overlap. It doesn't give you that horizontal scroll bar that we hate. So it works. What else do I have? Okay. Second one would be media queries, right? We do not need to reinvent the wheel. A lot of people have asked, like, where do you get your media queries from? And when I first started, I would just make up arbitrary breakpoints wherever I saw fit. But there's an easier way to go about this. Nowadays, I just grab breakpoints from different CSS frameworks, which are usually, pretty similar across the board. And it covers pretty much everything I need. So for example, here's Bootstrap. I'll just grab these and use these as breakpoints, and they cover everything I need. Here's Tailwind. Almost the same. I think there's only like one number that's different. So you don't have to actually just think about it. You just grab it and you can just immediately go with it. Next one, Flexbox. Most sites nowadays use Flexbox, which is super convenient for adapting your design on mobile. So let's say you have 3 columns side by side. If you want to make them responsive, you could just use Flex Wrap, and they wrap. So here's an example that I found from CSS Tricks, right? So these are all Flex containers. I mean, they're inside of a Flexbox container. So you resize the screen with Flex Wrap right here, and they wrap just by themselves without any breakpoints, without anything crazy, just super simple responsiveness. So that was pretty much it. So remember, no fixed widths or heights, simplify your media queries, and use Flexbox with FlexWrap. And that's it. Thank you all so much for listening to me.
Love it. I got a question for you, Cass. Since you know you are, in my opinion, the CSS guru of CSS gurus, right? Like you have all this knowledge when it comes to CSS. My question for you is, when it comes to these frameworks, like let's say the ones that you mentioned, like Bootstrap, Tailwind, etc., do you have a preference? Do you enjoy using one more than the other? Do you just enjoy vanilla CSS? Like, what do you normally use on like bigger size projects?
I enjoy vanilla CSS. I've literally spent all week taking apart a site that we got from Microsoft that was made on Bootstrap, just so I can put it with vanilla CSS, because I like vanilla. I like to be able to customize it. I have my own way of, containers and everything and the way that my company works, the same thing. We kind of have like the same mindset on those things. So it's easier for everybody to understand and just read like everything. So yeah, no framework for me, but I don't hate Bootstrap. And I've never tried Tailwind, and I'm sure that I know that everybody loves it. Don't hate me, but I haven't tried it. So maybe one day.
I know several people on the call right now that we've had very long conversations on this subject. So I will say, I'm a big fan of vanilla CSS. I'm using vanilla CSS on the current team that I'm on right now. I was previously using Tailwind with another team. I'm trying to convince this team to go to the Tailwind CSS route, and I'm going to make like a whole presentation on it. I am a big fan of Tailwind CSS, but vanilla CSS definitely kills it. But yeah, I would actually like try and say, Cass, maybe you should try some Tailwind and see how you like it. Don't, because it's different than Bootstrap, that's why. But for sure, vanilla CSS is beyond phenomenal. And I think the reason why I am a big fan, I'm going to make this one argument on the whole vanilla CSS versus Tailwind. The one thing that I actually love the most about Tailwind CSS, number one, for me, it's very easy to read. But number two, everyone on my team uses the exact same thing. So I don't have to worry about somebody who kind of did something a really hacky way, and I'm trying to figure out what they like kind of put together. It's all going to be one uniform style. So it makes things quite easy, and the customizability is pretty incredible. But I'm not the type of person that ever tries to like push a technology on somebody. I'm like, just try it. What's the worst that can happen? You spend a day not liking something, but maybe, you end up loving it. Who knows?
Yeah, I may try it for my new portfolio page. We'll see.
Yeah. One of my next tutorials that I'm actually dropping is in Tailwind CSS. So I think that would be a cool thing to kind of throw out there.
Yeah.
All right, Cass, thank you so much for being a part of this. Absolutely enjoyed the talk. I
think
everyone else did as well. Yes. All right. So let me go back to my list here because I think I know who it is, but I want to make sure. Yes, it is. Okay. This is the talk that I know is going to be incredible. I am going to give the floor now to Jacob, Michael Glenn. You want to go ahead and give Jacob the permission to unmute himself? Perfect.
I like how you teed me up there. That's thanks for that. Not only am I following these. Go ahead.
Say it again.
Just a quick announcement. Chin, if you're listening, you're gonna go right after this. So if you can go ahead and get your stuff right, it'd be super helpful. Thank you.
Go for it, Jacob.
Yeah. Not that I have to like also follow these amazing slides or anything. But yeah, so I'm Jacob Evans. You can follow me on Twitter, Jacob MG Evans. Every other social is gonna look exactly like that as well.
One thing I just want to do real fast, Cass, can you stop sharing your screen? So
we're got the same issues.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this is gonna be a similar problem. Oh, there we go. Okay, we're good. We're good. All right, go ahead, Jacob.
Awesome. All right. For those of you who don't know me, I work at Cloudflare on the workers team, primarily on Wrangler CLI, which is the Cloudflare workers CLI. And I have this Twitter space that I run occasionally, and Dio likes to come in and co-host me. So by all means, check those things out. Let me screen share here. This, you don't need to see my whole computer, so I'm just gonna try to screen share this. All right. So, oh, I lost like all the chat by doing this. Okay. Intro to Tanstack Query, aka if you're in the React ecosystem, is React Query. It was just recently made agnostic, so a little bit of a name change there. So this is one of those things that I'm going to be introducing you to it, but like what you recently have heard is meta frameworks this and meta frameworks that. A lot of meta frameworks are going to have their own way of doing data fetching and doing stuff like that. And because of that, you're going to be like, well, why do I need to know this? And we'll get to that. So the first thing is I'm a nerd and a Trekkie. So this is it's a good data query. All right. Now, what is React Query? What is query, and what is its benefits? I like to describe it as like an asynchronous management system, right? Not a data fetching library or system, not a state management system. It can be used for those things because of its nature. My mic keeps trying to auto adjust my gain, so I keep getting louder. Sorry about that. Let me just change something real quick so that you all don't hear me. There we go. Yeah, no, my Elgato mic is too smart for its own good. All right, so one of the benefits of query right out of the box is you're going to eliminate most of your use cases for use effects inside of a React ecosystem. And again, this is we're going to be talking about React a lot because that was what it was originally made for. These benefits also exist outside of React, right? Like a lot of them exist because the patterns are what were so powerful and the tooling around that. And so you'll actually see like a lot of the solid start, Next.js, like how they do data fetching. It's going to look, the patterns are going to look a lot similar to query. And that's because they were like, well, you know, if it works, if it ain't broke, why fix it? So the other thing is you don't have to manage your own data fetching states, right? So your own data in the fetching states, right? So one of the things that you'll notice when you're picking up some of the other libraries is you'll have to kind of create your own statuses and stuff, like is loading, is error, is that, is this. And that usually will live within the component that you're fetching the data. And so you have this weird cross section that happens between server state and your component state, which is supposed to be very isolated. The other thing is synchronizing and managing the server-side state efficiently. And what I mean by that is synchronizing server state with client state can be very difficult. And that's where you ended up with like a lot of those weird patterns with Redux back in the day, where people were trying to use something to like force this synchronization to happen at a very high level that was like outside the application. React Query just kind of handles that for you. Like it just disappears, kind of like the use effects. The problem is gone. Can be used for any async implementation. You're like, what does that mean? Because like all I've talked about right now is data fetching. It works, and why I call it async management system is it works with anything that's a promise. So I can handle anything from a fetch from the backend to some asynchronous operation that's happening in my system. That's like maybe it's a webcam behavior that I'm fetching data from, right? And then in the very core of everything is going to be the I like to call it is like the mitochondria, like the powerhouse of the React Query cell. It is just insanely powerful And most of the features that you see are built off of that core. It doesn't sound crazy, but it is. Let me hide this panel. Oops, wrong one. There we go, the floating controls. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is, and hopefully anybody that can't see, you'll speak up and tell me that you can't see anything. We're going to go look at the docs real quick. So these are the Tanstack query docs. If you actually, you can like go even further back, and you'll see like they have a really cool set of tools in Tanstack. This is new. It's amazing. This says it's new. It's just version 4 is new. We'll talk about that more later. And like this, you can see like the people using it. These are no joke companies that are utilizing this. This is for sale, you know. So these docs are really, really, really helpful to get you started, and also telling you like what's the benefits. One of my favorite things about these types of docs, and this is I mentioned this before, like the renaissance of docs in a previous talk. These docs are phenomenal in the sense that they're reference docs, they're guided docs, and then they have like, you know, actual things being utilized, and will point you in towards like those examples. And in here they'll have like the let me see if I can find real quick comparison, and this will show you like, okay, what's some alternatives, right? SWR, like when I was talking about the statuses, you have to make your own statuses and whatnot with like your own state. You have to do that with this as well. It does do a lot of cool things for you, but you're still kind of left holding back for stuff like that. So an example of that is this is material React table. It's a really cool library. You know, it literally is material and then the Tanstack table. So what you see here is a use effect, right? So that this isn't using React query. And you can see that up here, there's like a mixture of the server state, right? Like data fetching state with component state. This is your component state. Now, in this particular use case, it's pretty straightforward. You're most likely not going to run into like state issues where you have like two states that are not supposed to be true at the same time. But it can happen in more complex environments. The example would be like maybe it is loading while it is refetching, and those aren't supposed to be true at the same time, but you know, could happen in more advanced situations. The example that I created off of this, where I took React query and basically got rid of that. And you can see here is we have a use fetch table. Okay, this in particular lives in here, and it is that same thing that you saw inside the use effect. Okay, but it's being passed into the use query here. And so all this asynchronous handling behavior is happening here, including fetching the actual data. And all you're returning is here is the all you're returning here is the use query. And with that you have oh, wrong one. With that you have like all of these available on the custom hook, right? And so your entire component becomes, here's the table, material UI and whatnot. Here's your configurations for your table. And here's your component state. That's it. That's it. All right. Everything else is living here. The other cool thing I have to mention, oh, is it going to really do this to me right now, Code Sandbox? Really? I see you working in the background. Okay, I can't show it off right now, but there's a thing that's like one of the biggest aspects of like being able to develop with React Query is the React Query Dev Tools. It allows you to get insights on the data fetching, like the current state of the data, because this is a stale while revalidating pattern library. It gives you insights on like the configurations that are set up, all kinds of stuff. And so a real quick also demo of like, I want to like show like the power of the TypeScript mixed with also the value of being able to handle any promise again, because like I mentioned, there's no limitation on what you can pass into React Query as long as it's a promise. Here you see that it's inferring that it's either a number or it's undefined for the data object. And then if I go to here, there's this other feature out of the plethora of features that exist on React Query, that this is a number, right? And you can see data number. I'm checking if data exists, so it removes the undefined. Should be, yeah. Well, that was a mistake. So what this is a transform, and what I'm able to do is I'm passing in this promise. I know there's an object coming back, and I want to force the number value to become a string before it's utilized in say like whatever components you're going to use that custom hook in. So like say it's use the use table fetch. I can transform say like all those numbers into strings before the data is actually being utilized in the component, right? So this is like a on the fly transform, but it's not happening somewhere like you're not piping or anything like that. This is happening to the data after it's received by React Query. So yeah, so this is another just reference that like you can pass in any type of asynchronous data into React Query. I don't have time for a Q&A, unfortunately. You can come to my Twitter Spaces and ask me a million questions there. I have them every night. Actually, usually I start them in about 5 minutes on Wednesday, Thursdays, and Fridays. It's 8 p.m. Central Time that I have them. Like I said, there's a lot of cool people that show up. Theo is one of them. If you're interested in talking to Theo and trying to pick his brain. The other thing is I do have a Discord. It's called Open Source Raid Guild. You can find it in either my my website, my Twitter. There's a few different places you can find it. But yeah, if there is a reference and credit here, code examples. So the material table that was Thomas von Cut. Obviously, there's the query docs, and yeah, thank you for having me on. See you around.
Thank you, Jacob. I will also second. I've been a fan of Jacob for a while. We've talked God knows how many times. I often try to pop into his Twitter Spaces. Some of the minds and people that do go in there, absolutely incredible. Highly recommend checking it out. If you like Twitter Spaces, I'll throw mine in there as well. We have some great Twitter Spaces revolving around tech, whether it's technical, whether it's soft skill. Matter of fact, let me shout this out real fast too, by the way. And I have one extra thing that I completely forgot to mention earlier. We had a last minute sponsor kind of hook us up and help us out. And I have 100 free months of Pluralsight memberships to give out to everybody. So that's completely covered and free. I need to be sharing that link since we have more than 100 people in here. So whoever gets it, I suppose. But I think from the admin team and stuff like that, we won't be grabbing it. But I wanted to make sure that y'all walked away today saying, not only did I get some value out of the talks, but I was able to continue my learning. And each month at Pluralsight, it's like $30, and they don't give it out for free. So I was super shocked when they agreed. I didn't even think they were going to give me 100, if I'm being completely real. So that was a nice surprise when I saw that number. So super excited to kind of share that. I'll grab that link in a moment and put that in the chat. But the other thing that I want to say is next Wednesday, the 16th, if I remember the dates correctly. Yes, the 16th is Wednesday. We will be doing a Twitter space with some of your, well, you may not know them, but some of you may, some of the biggest creators or educators when it comes to the cloud space. And I talk to a lot of beginners where like, I want to know more about cloud, but I'm kind of intimidated. I don't know how to do this. And I've done the space once before, which was a big help for a lot of folks. But one of the things that we're going to be doing there is we have a beginner's guide to cloud for software developers, and it's going to completely break down and give you a path that you can take. Also with that, Pluralsight, again, partnering with me on that one, they're giving access to all their cloud courses completely for free. I think it's until like the beginning of next year or something like that. So even after that space, you can kind of run with all that content and check that out. So hopefully I'll have a link for that as well. But I really want to make sure that y'all are getting the resources that you need. It's working on mine. Yes, if y'all didn't grab it already, I'll drop it again in the chat. Right now, that's the link. It looks like quite a few people have already grabbed it. So just make sure you grab your free membership to Pluralsight while you can, please. I think there's more than enough for everybody in here. So, go ahead and get it. So many people were able to get it. Love it. The link keeps giving me an error from Pluralsight. Hopefully we didn't use all 100 already, but just keep trying, I suppose. All right, without further ado, it is now time for Braydon to speak. After Braydon, we will be going to Ram, and then I'll be giving a talk on React error boundaries, which I have to remind myself all the details on that one. But Scott, if you can go ahead and give Braydon the ability to unmute themselves.
Yeah, you should be able to now.
He's saying, it looks like he can't.
There we go.
There we go.
All right. That's my bad. That's user error right there. I was unmuted and then I clicked mute as soon as I was unmuted. So that's my bad. But awesome. Well, first off, congratulations to all the cohorts that are wrapping up today. Your projects look fantastic. And also to the other speakers, thanks so much for everything you've done. The topics have been fantastic. And I have to follow up with that now. So I'm giving a topic on application confidence, an introduction to testing React. And we've got a few minutes to do this, so let's go ahead and jump in. But before we do, just a little bit about me. My name's Braydon. I'm a front-end engineer at LogicGate. I love everything JavaScript and CSS. And I live in the DFW area with my beautiful wife and my wonderful daughter. You can see on the right. I do blog occasionally, so I have that on my website, which is linked there. I tend to be active on Twitter sometimes, so you can find me there as well. And then, of course, if you're interested in these slides later on after the talk, I do have a URL here, and I'll post that as well on Twitter and in the chat afterwards. So I want to talk about really quickly the purpose of this talk. My job this evening is to introduce you to the concepts of testing, so that by the end, in about 10, maybe 15 minutes, you'll be able to see how much confidence you can have in your application just by writing simple test cases. And now I understand that's an ambitious goal. We're already well into the evening, and so I'll try and make things interesting. But my hope is that one step at a time, it'll be obvious and clear how essential testing can be for your React application. So you might be asking, well, what is testing? What in the world is testing? I make changes in my application, I go back to my browser, I click around, and everything still works. And that's all fine and dandy. But when I'm talking about testing, I'm referring to a variant of automated testing that focuses on component interaction from a user perspective. And I really want to emphasize the user perspective here. We're not talking about implementation details. We're talking about how the user is going to use your application. And you might be thinking, he's talking about unit testing, and that's great. But no, I'm not talking about unit testing, which is another popular variant of automated testing, where you'll actually test your React components and functions in isolation from the rest of your application. Tonight, I'm talking about integration testing specifically, which is when we write tests that make assertions based on your React DOM state to specifically simulate and focus on components, again, from that user perspective. And here's a famous tweet. Some of you have no doubt seen this. This is from Guillermo, the CEO of Vercel. He says, write tests, not too many, and mostly integration. I think he has some really good points here. And don't get me wrong, I believe that there are scenarios where unit testing is not only helpful, but it can be essential. But again, I think Guillermo makes a great point. For the majority of test cases, integration testing with React provides the most confidence that your application actually works as you intend. So then why is testing important? One of the reasons why we write tests, again, is to gain that confidence that our software works as intended from a user perspective. This is a quote from Kent C. Dodds. He's actually the author of the React testing library, which we're going to be using today. He said, the more tests resemble the way your software is used, the more confidence that they can give you. So that's why we write tests, to gain that confidence. But one of the reasons why we actually run those tests is to ensure that we haven't broken anything. This happens to me all the time. Imagine, the following scenario where you're asked to make a small-ish change, maybe to an area of the code base you know nothing about. It's not the simplest thing you could do, but it's also not the most complex. But how confident would you feel pushing up your changes? Do you think it broke anything? You may not know. You might do that local testing, but you may not have the context of the surrounding application to know how it interacts with other things. I've definitely made a quick refactor and come to find out later that it broke something in production, right? So tests can help minimize regressions by catching bugs faster and ideally before your code ships to production. But by having tests in place, it doesn't really matter if you're a subject matter expert in the area of the code base or someone just touching it for the first time. The test will let you know if your change caused a regression because it emulates, again, how the user will use the application. And that's comforting. Now, obviously, this isn't a catch-all and it isn't foolproof, but having this extra layer of protection will, I guarantee you, save you more times than one. So let's talk about our testing tool belts. You may hear a bunch of names being thrown around when discussing testing in React. Things like Jest, Enzyme, Jasmine, Karma, Chai. There's a bunch of tools, a bunch of frameworks. It's easy to confuse all these options, but tonight we're going to be focusing on Jest, which is our test runner, and the React testing library, which is our testing framework. And there's some good news for those of you who use Create React app to generate your React projects. This is already set up for you. It comes out of the box, which is awesome. So speaking of which, I actually have a demo to show. And so we're going to change things up and get a little risky and do some live coding, and we'll see how it goes. But let me go ahead and switch over to the demo project. Here we just have a very basic newsletter section where you can go ahead and type in your email. So I'll say test@test.com, and I'll click subscribe. And when you do that, you'll get a success message down below. It's that simple. You can't actually click the button, without entering an email. You have to enter an email, you click subscribe, you get a success message. So a very simple example, but one that I think lends well to being introduced to testing in React. So we are going to go ahead and open up VS Code. And here, this is a project that I just spun up really quickly. It uses Tailwind for styling, but this was built using Create React app. And we're going to go ahead and just jump right in and start writing some tests. And what's cool too, I know this is like a ton of information, but thankfully this is recorded so you can go back if needed and review some stuff. So this is all inside the app component. I haven't created additional components. You can, of course, do that if you want to. The concepts still apply. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is create a new file in our source folder. I'm going to call it app.test.js. And this is how you specify a test file. So what we're going to do first, whenever you create a test file for a component, is actually import the component. So we're going to import app from app. And then we actually need to identify a test case. And how do we do that? Well, again, this is all coming from a user perspective. So I think if we go back to our application, if this is what we're actually testing, it may be valuable and beneficial to actually check that our actual newsletter is rendering with the input and the button, because those are things that your user is going to interact with. So it might be beneficial to write a test for that. So let's do that first. Let me swap back over to VS Code. And what we're going to do first is write and declare a test using the test function here. It takes two parameters. One is the name of the test. So we could say something like renders the form and subscribe button, something like that, something simple. Simple but explicit, so that way if this test fails, we know exactly what's going wrong. So that's one argument or parameter. The other is actually a callback function where we'll go ahead and write our test. And so the first thing that you're going to want to do inside of every test is actually render our component. And so I'll go ahead and bring in render from the React testing library. And then we're going to render our code under test. This is just our app component right now. This could be a different component, a different page. Depends on your project, but we'll just go ahead and render this just like you would any other React component. And there we go. And I think if we just go ahead and save this, and in my terminal down below, I'm just going to go ahead and run npm test. And I'll go ahead and press A to run all tests. We only have one right now, but I think it's in watch mode already, so we should be good as we add additional tests. But you can see this passes, and that's fine. We're not actually doing anything with this test, though. We're not making any assertions. It's not really valuable to us at this point. Before we move on, I just really quickly want to show you this screen object, which we're going to be using heavily here in a minute. But it has a function called debug, which is really cool because when we run this, you can see that it will actually spit out the DOM in your terminal, which is great. So this is super helpful if you're trying to figure out maybe what's showing up inside of your testing black box, so to speak. And it can help with your queries and things like that. Speaking of queries, let me go ahead and delete this. We're going to actually go ahead and locate some elements inside of our DOM. And so to do that, again, we're going to use the screen object. And the screen object has a bunch of query functions that we can use to find these elements. We're going to be introduced to a few tonight. There's a whole bunch. We don't have time to look at all of them. But this first one that we're going to look at is called get by placeholder text. Okay, and this one is specifically useful for inputs, text areas, maybe elements like that. And so we can go ahead and pass in a string here. And I believe, let me actually bring this over here. And I will just go ahead and grab the placeholder text that we've applied to the input. And I'll put it in right there, okay? And so we can actually go ahead and save this. And notice that the test passes, it refreshed. It was really quick. You may not have seen it. And this is something to note here about this specific query method. Whenever we use query methods that start with get by, those functions will actually throw an error and fail the test if an element can't be found, which means technically we don't need to make an assertion, which we're going to actually use in a minute. But let me show you here. If I actually go ahead and in the code under test on the right-hand side, if I remove this input, the test should fail, and it does, and we see that. And that's because it can't find an element on the DOM. So we know that our test is working as of right now, which is great. But I want to refactor this a little bit to be a little bit more semantic. And I'm going to bring in an expect statement here. And this is what we call an assertion. It's what's going to control if your test passes or fails. We technically don't need this because of the query functions we're using for this test. But semantically, I think I prefer this. So we're going to paste that inside of our expect statement, and then we're going to use a matcher from Jest. And we're going to be using the to be in the document matcher. So this reads really nicely too. You can say that this test is expecting this element, and we're using a specific query function to be in our document. And if we save that, you can see the test still passes, which is great. Really quickly, though, we also want to make sure that the button is inside of our DOM as well. So we're going to create another expect statement. We're going to say screen.getByRole. This is a new query statement. This is perfect for specific semantic elements on your DOM. But for this one, we're just going to pass in button. We only have one button in our component, so this will work. If you have more, you might have to edit this to be a little bit more specific. But again, we're going to use the same matcher. We're going to say to be in the document. And we'll go ahead and save, and you can see our test is passing, which is great. If we wanted to make sure that this fails, which is always recommended, you can go ahead and alter the code under test, not the test itself, to make sure that our test is actually doing what it's supposed to be doing. Okay. Let me bring that back in. And that's the first test. Okay. It may seem like a lot, but hopefully it reads really easily and you're following along. So next up is another test. Let's go ahead and think of a new testing scenario. Now, I tend to gravitate towards testing the unhappy paths first. I think it's a little bit easier, especially if you're following test-driven development, which is its own talk entirely. We're not going to cover it tonight. But because of this and thinking from a user perspective and user interaction, I think the next logical thing to test would be that if we go back to our demo here, if we click the subscribe button, we would not expect our success message to show up. So that might make a good test. So let's see what we can do here. Let's name this one, test does not render success text if email is not provided and button is clicked. A long name, but again, I like these long names so that they're very explicit, and if it fails, we know exactly what's going wrong. So first up, don't forget we have to render our component under test. That's what's going on right here. And we'll go ahead and do that. And next, we need to actually perform an action. And up until this point, we've queried for elements in our testing environment, but we haven't performed any actions. And how do we do that? Well, thankfully, the React testing library has a very handy user event object that we can use. And so we can go ahead and bring that in. And I'll say user event, and you can see VS Code suggests an import. And it has a click function, which is awesome. It makes it super easy to do these kind of things. The click function is asking for an element, and so we can find that element by using our same queries that we have in the past. So I'm just going to grab this query where we're querying for the button, and we can go ahead and click on that. And then we can actually make our assertions. We're going to expect screen dot query by text, and I'm going to use a regex here. I'm going to say you're subscribed, and I'll pass in this I here. It's going to ignore the casing, so that way we don't have to use capitals and things like that. And then the matcher we're going to use here is a little bit different. We're going to say we're expecting this not to be in the document, okay? And so we can go ahead and run this. You can see the test passes, but I don't trust it yet. I'm going to go ahead into my code under test, the app component, and comment this out. And let's see, the test is passing. Uh-oh, something's gone wrong in a live coding environment. Who could have thought? But here's something to note, right? This query by text function is a little bit different than you'll notice the get by functions that we've been using for querying. Remember, the get by functions will not, they will throw an error if it can't find an element, whereas the query by functions will not throw an error. And this is important because of the way that we want to have this test run and verify, is that we want to make sure that this is not in our DOM. So we would use the query by function here. And which, by the way, the React testing library has some great documentation, and they have this table here, which is very handy for identifying which functions and queries you can use to grab those elements. Okay, moving back over to our test, let's write one more, okay? Let's go ahead and now test the happy path for this. When we click the button, we add some text, we would expect that the text would show up, the success message would show up in our DOM. So let's write another test. Let's say renders success message when email is submitted, something like that. And again, let's render our app. And you'll notice there's some duplication here. There are probably some ways that we could refactor this to make it more dry. But for the sake of time, we'll leave that for another talk. So again, we'll bring in the user event object, and this time instead of clicking, we're going to use type. And this takes two parameters. The first one is the object we're going to be typing into, and so we want to grab that input from our component. And so I'm going to grab this query we've already been using. And then it takes a second parameter, which is the actual text you want to type into that element. And so we're just going to say something like test@test.com. Okay. And that will go ahead and type something into the element. At this point, we want to click on the button. Again, notice how our test resembles what our user would be doing. This is important. So we're going to click on our button, and then we're going to expect screen dot get by text. And again, I'll just use the regex here. And we're going to expect this to be in the documents. And let's go ahead and run that. And you can see that our test is passing, which is awesome. Now, fingers crossed, right? If we go ahead and comment this out, we run the test. Okay, cool. Everything it's failing. That's what I'd want to see. So that's comforting, right? There we go. And we can get it to pass again. So I know I'm just about out of time, but let's see. In summary, I just want to wrap this up. Testing React application provides confidence by simulating how users interact with our application. We have assurance also that changes that we've made have not introduced regressions. It's not foolproof, but it's an extra layer of protection. We looked at the basics of a React testing library and Jest. We looked at how to define a test, how to query the DOM for elements and make robust assertions from a user perspective. I also dropped a link to the repo. If you're interested in tinkering with this yourself, feel free to do that. But that is what I have for you this evening. Thanks so much for your patience. I hope it was interesting, insightful. And again, thank you to all the speakers who have been giving their time this evening.
Loved it. To be honest, y'all may not understand this, but testing definitely is a very, very big deal. So I highly recommend checking it out, especially if you're working on teams and things like that. I think that will be phenomenal. Without further ado, to the next speaker now, we're going to be going on to Ramiro. Ramiro, go ahead.
All right. Hi. Thanks everyone for sticking around. I'm probably going to trim this. I know it's already 8:30 in the evening. Everybody's probably got places to go. Oh, it's already at least 8:30 in Texas. So I just wanted to say, if anybody's interested in seeing the full talk, we can schedule it at another time. But I'm going to trim it to the things that are really important. So the intention here was to hopefully answer 5 React interview questions in the form of a lightning talk within 15 minutes, but that's going to put us a little bit over. I wanted to focus on things that are really important because let's be honest right quick. You've all seen the market, you've all seen the layoffs, right? There's like thousands of people looking for jobs as well as everybody on here potentially. So I'm going to talk about what's important with the time that I have, not necessarily answer these questions. There's a talent pyramid where at the bottom are all the, think the food pyramid, but there's a talent pyramid where all these entry level or early career developers are at the bottom, right? That's the fat part, the meaty part. And then above that, you have mid-level developers. They've been doing this for maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And you have senior developers above that, right? And the pyramid is getting smaller. And at the very top, then you have seniors. And then at the very top, you have like principal, lead, staff developers, right? And so it makes sense that the majority of the talent is at the bottom. So companies would say, hey, look, there's a lot of talent. Let's go get it, right? But that's not what companies do. If you look online, a lot of places, they're looking for senior developers. So I'm not trying to scare you away. Danny kind of mentioned this earlier. I'm not trying to scare you away at all. Don't stop coding. Don't stop learning. But you have an opportunity to set yourself apart because you're interviewing with, 10 or 15, 20 other people, right? That are all in your shoes. And I've had an opportunity over the course of my career. I've been, writing code for about 10, 11, 12 years now, professionally only for 7. And I've had an opportunity to interview people. And there's certain things that make me say, I want to hire that person. Like right now, it's a yes for me, right? It's like we're on X Factor or whatever it is. It's like, it's a yes for me. And this was my goal for this talk was, how do I get it to where, how do I help you get to where it's an immediate yes? Just to give you context, I did a couple rounds of interviews in the last 3 weeks. I just accepted an offer for a lead developer position at a company that I'll name soon on LinkedIn. Yeah, I appreciate that. And so I'm speaking from experience here. I just went through this exact same thing. And there are certain things on the company that I mentioned that earlier part that I want it to be an immediate yes. The manager or the director that I'm taking the spot under, after the first question, she told me, she said, I've already made my answer. I've already made my decision, right? With a big smile on her face. And, but she said, to be fair to the other candidates, we're going to keep going. And that's what I want for you, right? You don't want to go in there and stumble. We're all going to do it. So the way that we do that is we don't focus simply on the how, but we also focus on the what and on the why. And you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute, because I can almost guarantee you that somebody here, including myself at some point in time, started working with a tool or technology and didn't really know what it was, but I started in a tutorial, right, or in a video, and it's like, oh, they're telling me to do this thing, and so I write the code and I follow along and it works. And then I learn a little bit more and it works, right? But when you go to an interview, they're testing for more, right? They want to know, do you really know this thing? Now, again, I understand early career developers, you don't know everything, that's okay. But if all things are being equal and there's two people that I have to choose between, meaning attitudes are both great, they're both hungry, they're both like been learning like crazy. But if one person can like has a deeper understanding, they're going to be able to come to the team and say, okay, this person understands React. They understand the value proposition. They understand when to use it and when not to use it. So I'm going to look at the time here in a second, but if I can answer at least one question, we're going to start with this one. So what is React? I kind of broke this down into like 3 different tiers, if you will. If you were going to answer just the basics of React, at least get this. According to the React docs, it says that React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. You know them as components, right? You build components. It's great for creating single page applications, meaning one HTML file updated via JavaScript, right? The React library does all the heavy lifting. It updates the DOM. At the very least, I'd like you to know that. But let's say I need somebody that's really good with React and they understand a little bit more. Okay, so I can add on to that and say, well, React is declarative. Declarative, it's not imperative. That's something I didn't know a couple of years ago. And I actually did a lot of research on it, and I'd recommend you do the same thing. When you come across something, stop. There's a term there. I don't understand it. What does that mean? If you don't know what the difference is between declarative and imperative, I challenge you to take a note down and go and brush up on it or learn it. And it's important because I know we've all seen this. And I'm not calling anybody out, but we jump straight from like HTML, CSS, and then we do like maybe a week of JavaScript, and then we go straight into React. And so we don't really know JavaScript. And if you haven't done any real DOM manipulation, you don't understand the amount of work that React does for you, right? And so when you write and you update the DOM via JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript, that's imperative. You're saying, I am going to get an anchor to the element or the parent, right? So document.getElementBy or a query selector, right? You're going to get an anchor to it, or you're going to get a reference to it. And you're going to say, hey, I'm going to create a new element and I'm going to attach it to you. You're saying the what, the why, and the how, basically. You're doing all of it. But React does that for you. And it allows you to simply say, I want an H1 right here. And React does the heavy lifting for you. So React is declarative. And somebody else probably has a really good definition that works for them. This goes with like creating a mental model of the thing that you're working with. So I'd encourage you to do that. I could also say that it's component based, meaning everything in React is a component, right? Everything. When you're looking at the page, the top part all the way down, it's composable, right? You can render components within components with components, right? So like Inception, it's composable. And you can compose sections or mini applications or user experiences like that. And then let's say we were to go to like an advanced, okay? You're doing your homework and you're like, man, I really want to set myself apart. I really want to set myself apart. Start talking about, or get to the point where you can talk about how React works, right? The real value proposition that React efficiently updates just the part of the DOM that needs to be updated. How does it do that? Well, React maintains a virtual DOM, right? In memory. It's basically one big JavaScript object in memory that maintains the current structure of your application, right? So it's JavaScript objects representing your components and their current state. And it diffs the old virtual DOM with the new one, and then via a renderer, it renders or re-renders or updates the real DOM, right? So then you can start to see how this thing works behind the scene. And because of that, you really understand what's on the website when it says learn React once or learn once, write anywhere. Oh, okay, it's because the React library itself, that's the same, but the renderer is different. That's why you can write or leverage like the similar or same hooks inside React Native or on the web. The renderer is changed. It's different per platform. And whenever I ask questions when I'm doing these interviews, I like to have follow-up questions. Y'all can share in the chat if y'all have follow-up questions y'all like to do. But if you think about it, right? I've asked you, what is React? And you kind of told me some stuff. I want to know now, when would you choose to use React? And when would you choose not to use it? Do we just automatically go to it? Is our go-to now just we simply, create React app or whatever it is, right? Do we just use Vite and create a React app? Or do we think and say, do we need React? Are we adding too much complexity? Are you spinning up a React app simply for like a landing page? Maybe you meet someone, they're like, hey, we got a local business and we need a about me page. And you're like, oh, I'm going to go React. That's right. You're adding potentially too much complexity. And in that case, I'd say that's when I would choose not to use React, because I don't need reusable components. I don't need the complexity that it brings. So now you're starting to understand system design, right? And you're thinking about resources. Well, it costs me less in terms of overhead and maintenance and all that stuff going forward if I simply use it when it's necessary. All right, so that was just some thoughts on that. And if y'all want me to keep going, I can keep going. Or looking for a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
Question, go for it.
All right, so I'm going to do this one here because this is kind of important, and I want to be very explicit that I'm going to ask the question: what is the difference between class and functional components, or function components, however you want to say it? I want to just come straight out and say that if you don't know how to write a class component, you should. Now, if you've watched any videos today and they say, don't write any more class components, they're deprecated, it's, whatever, absolutely wrong. I've seen lots of code bases that have tons of class components, and you will be expected to work with them, potentially convert them or whatever. You're going to have to modify them. So you absolutely need to know how to write a class component from the ground up today, as well as modify it. Okay, so if we do this again, this is just for a visual, so we can kind of see this. We see that the class component is at the top, and then we have two functional components below. One is using the function keyword, right? It's a function declaration. Also, if you hear me use these terms, they're just like common, and they're not specific to React, right? These are JavaScript things, right? That class is a JavaScript keyword, syntactic sugar on top of like a factory. And then you have basically a straight up function declaration. And then you have the third one down there is just a function expression, right? All right. So if we talk about like, how would I answer this in the basic? What's the difference between them? Well, a class component is created with the class keyword, and it extends React.component. So right here, we should know a little bit about object-oriented programming. Now I know there's some syntactic sugar. We don't want to go in detail into that because we don't really have the time. But it extends, right, or inherits kind of thing from React.component. A functional component can be created using function declarations or expressions. And you'll see that those two on the bottom. Class components are considered stateful. They're considered stateful because this goes back to your core JavaScript. Why are they considered stateful, or why were they stateful in the beginning? Because when you instantiate a class, you get an instance of that class, or you get an object at runtime, right? So objects live in memory. Functions were not stateful in the beginning, before pre-hooks. They were considered dumb components. They were considered dumb components. Why? Because functions, when they get executed or invoked, they create an execution context that gets pushed onto the stack or the call stack. they return something, in our case, JSX, and then they get popped off the stack. See, but the class component, it's an object that lives in memory at runtime, and it's the render method that gets called, right, over and over. So they're allowed to be stateful because that object lives in memory as long as there's a reference to it. Garbage collection doesn't pick it up. And so that's why you can have a state property on it. And that was the difference. Again, I kind of bled into like, intermediate. That second part was like intermediate stuff. But you're going to learn that if your foundation in JavaScript is stronger. All right, so let's get moving real quick here. The difference here for advanced is I'd want you to know for sure how to convert from a class to a function and a function to a class. So if we look at this example here, at the very top, you can kind of commit it to memory when you're thinking about a class component. The only required render method method on a class that extends React component is the render method. That's the only one that's required, right? And in a function component, you just return the JSX, right, straight out without a render method. Why? Because it's not an object. It's not an instance of a class at runtime. So once we understand those things, the rest becomes easier. When converting from class to a function component, we have to be aware of state. What state did this class component have? Okay, so if I'm converting over, I'm most likely going to have to reference like use state or something. I need to be aware of the this keyword. Have y'all know about the this keyword, right? When I was first working with React, like years ago, I came across class components and I was like, oh, this thing is driving me crazy, right? And it's because my JavaScript wasn't strong. If you're strong in JavaScript, you understand what this keyword references. Okay. And then, but if you aren't strong in JavaScript and you go into React and you're like, I'm in this class component and I'm saying this dot props and I'm saying this dot state. Why? Well, it's because that's an object, right? It's an instance of that class. It's an object at runtime. And therefore I need to reference that object and those properties on the object and those methods on the object. So you have to say this because this references the object. You can't use this in a functional component because this in a functional component references the global object, which in the browser is the window, right? Again, this is what I would expect from somebody who's like advanced. And again, even if you're like 0 to 3 years early career, you can still learn this stuff. And I'm telling you, if I was interviewing like two people side by side and you told me how to convert a class to a functional and I have like a lot of legacy code that I'm going to upgrade, I'm going to choose you because you know where to go. All right, I beat that. I beat that too much, but I could talk about this all day. I love interviewing. I'm going to call it there. I'm going to, for everybody's sake, but I'm going to say this. I will put this up. I'll give it to Danny. He can share it. I'm not on Twitter. There's some really cool stuff here. I was going to talk about fragments. I'm going to zoom through this quick. I don't really going to show it to you. You'll be able to see it later. I was going to talk about hooks. No big deal. Again, this talk could have gone on forever. So I was going to talk about error boundaries. Danny has a talk on error boundaries that he did in Atlanta. I was there. But I was going to talk about error boundaries. We're going to skip all that. Lastly, if you want to connect, let's connect. I can guarantee you, if I have an opportunity to hire early career devs, so one of the reasons I took this lead position was because I wanted to have more control over my space, over my domain, the thing that I'm charged with. And I can guarantee you that if I have any headcount to hire or to help, build out the team, I'm going to look for early career devs because I love training. I love mentoring. But yeah, let's connect. You got anybody has any questions? I'm only on LinkedIn, unfortunately. Time constraints and stuff like that. So that's where you can find me. That's where this points to. I've got a bunch of personal projects I do. I also run a podcast with a friend of mine who is basically my co-founder now. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks, Danny.
Hey, I loved it. And I had no idea you were at Render, and I'm about to give that same talk right now. So totally love that talk. I actually just tweeted out his podcast link as well. So if you want to check out his podcast, highly recommend it. And definitely use that QR code right now and or search him on LinkedIn. He's pretty easy to find, Ramiro Beltran, and I highly recommend it. I've been following Ramiro for a little while, and I actually got to go to another one of his talks at another meetup group, and I thought it was pretty incredible. So highly, highly recommend it. Ramiro, thank you so much for even being here. Genuinely appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate you just for letting me letting me join this panel. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to deliver this talk. And it's going to be this one. Hopefully you see everything that I'm seeing right here. Okay. So I'm going to be giving this talk on React error boundaries. I'm assuming everybody can see the React error boundary message on the screen, right? Perfect. Okay. I don't know if you saw my eHarmony profile or this one, so I was making sure everything looked the way it was supposed to look. No, so React error boundaries. The funny thing about React error boundaries is I learned about them because of a bad experience. So I didn't learn about this like, oh, I'm just geeking out on something. I actually came across something that made me research this. So to give you an idea, I was actually booking a flight, and it was on a flight website, you know, how we all do. And when I was on the website, one of my biggest fears whenever it comes to shopping online has always been one thing, that I hit the buy button and nothing happens. And now I'm like, did it charge my card? Did it not charge my card? Is it holding the charge and is going to let it out? Do I press the buy button again? That's like the most critical time where I think it's very important to be very vocal about whatever's transpiring, right? There's other areas where you can probably slack and it's not going to be the end of the world. But at that moment, communication is very essential. So I remember I was on that website. And I don't know why I clicked on this, by the way, but let me just read this real fast. I'm Danny Thompson. I work on the commerce team that ends up being my specialty. Every company that I've worked for so far has always been on the e-commerce teams. And essentially my goal whenever someone goes on our website is from the time they land on the website to the point of purchase, we run that show. And our goal is to build up the most amount of confidence, but also to help you make sure you have enough information to make a very informed decision. I always say educated people always make informed decisions. I want to make sure you're getting whatever education that you're looking for in order to make that purchase. I've broken production level code more than quite a few times, and I'm a full stack developer. My previous stack was React and Go. Right now, it's going to be React and Java. So back to the story at hand. I was on the website for this airline, and I pressed purchase, and nothing happens. The flight in total was around like $1,100, and I'm freaking out saying, I just bought $1,100 worth of airline tickets and nothing's happening. Do I press the buy button again? Is it going to charge my card twice? Am I going to end up now spending 2 hours on customer service trying to make sure like I cancel a transaction? That's a nightmare, right? But luckily for me, everybody doesn't have the superpower. But I can open my developer console and I can inspect elements and I can open the network tag and I can see what's happening. And I found out that an API actually had an error, and more than likely in that scenario that my purchase wasn't sent, but I was able to figure that out through that ability. The average individual doesn't have that ability. So what can they do? But the problem now becomes, how do you orchestrate this or develop this? Because in most scenarios, when something goes wrong, the entire component tree unmounts. And so now you just have a blank white page. That's a nightmare for us, especially as developers, or especially from a customer perspective. If I'm on a website and I hit something, the whole screen goes white, that means I'm not putting my credit card information. I don't know what's happening right now. I don't know how this is going to transpire or progress. I don't have trust at this moment. So it leads me to this thing. How can you build more trust with your consumers? You don't build trust in a product by just putting it out there. You build it by providing a useful experience and an informational experience and giving relevant information at the right times. It's not useful when you're giving information way before that step even transpires. Haven't you ever been in situations where they give you like 15 set of instructions at the very beginning of things? You start doing things, and by step 2 or 3, you forgot what the hell was on step 1, right? You go back, you revert. Relevant information at the right time helps people do one thing: progress. one of the biggest things, especially when it comes to e-commerce applications, and a lot of people don't realize this, is something called abandoned carts. When a customer is basically in the process of making a purchase and then says, you know what, I don't feel comfortable about this, or, you know, I'll try this later, or I'm going to go look for other things. This is a big number. 90% of abandoned carts on the internet are never re-picked up again. So that means if you've actually got them making that purchase and they abandon it, it's more than likely they're never going to come back. So why did they abandon? Did they abandon due to a lack of information? Did they abandon because they no longer feel confidence in your product? Did they abandon because they found something better on a competitor website? Did they abandon because of a bad experience and now you force them to go check out their competitor? There's so many things that can happen here. So don't give them that reason to abandon. Make sure you're prioritizing their experience, their information, everything. And by giving relevant information at the right times, you can keep them there, keep them confident, and keep them sticking with your service. So to give you an idea, we're going to be going over React error boundaries. Error boundaries basically save you from crashes. And here's how we're going to use it. I'm not going to live code this. Normally my demo here would involve us actually coding something where we can kind of show us breaking things and making things and this and that. But I have an example application that I've put together that we can kind of go over. And hopefully within the next few minutes, you're going to walk away truly feeling like you understand the entire concept of a React error boundary, its use case, and other ways that you can implement it on your own side. To be honest, it's a very good tool to be utilizing. I see a lot more companies starting to adopt it. It has a couple setbacks, which we will go over as well, because I want you having the total picture, but hopefully you'll be able to make some very cool moves with this. So what are error boundaries? Error boundaries are React components that catch JavaScript errors anywhere in their child component tree and display, this is key now, it will also display a fallback UI instead of unmounting all the components, meaning we can tell this, hey, when this thing breaks, we want to go ahead and display XYZ message for the user so that way they feel very confident in what's happening. That's the big difference. Instead of it just breaking and the application continuing, we can now give them a very specific message to keep them feeling very confident in what we're doing here. So here's the app. Very simple app. It's based off of a banking application, okay? So here we have our checking account, our savings account, our 401k, and some banks do this thing where it's like reward points. I've never used them. I know somebody probably uses it for something, but we have that there. Now, it would be pretty bad if one of these things broke and it broke the entire application. It wouldn't make sense, especially from a user perspective. Like if I'm banking with this place and now I can't see the totals of my bank accounts, that's a very terrifying moment for me, right? I would not want that on anybody to see, like, did my money disappear? Do I have access to my funds? What's going on, right? So this is what our application looks like. Pretty simplistic, but hopefully it should be easy for you to follow. So we have our cons that we're using here. We are mocking an API using a mocking service. But here we have our API information coming from banking, and we basically have our information coming in, and we're mapping that information. So we're using the ID, which, you know, of course, if you're utilizing React, you have to have a very unique ID for everything that you're mapping. We have the name of whatever that container is and the total dollar amounts. And we have the same thing happening for our reward section as well. Very similar setup over here. And so now we can kind of go forward. And this is what our mocked API kind of looks like. So we have our unique IDs, we have our checking, savings, and 401k, and our dollar amounts. And also over here, we have our reward points, which is showing the total of the points. So two different APIs. And with this one, we're going to be mocking a failure of an API by giving it a 500 error, okay? So when we give the 500 error, instead of seeing the 4 containers, because of the error in the reward point, which was the 1 container by itself over here, it's completely broke the entire page. So because of some reward points having some random API error that we may or may not predicted, it now broke our checking account information, our 401k information. That's a bad experience. Why should something on one random portion of the screen derail everything else that we've got going on, right? So, and then of course you look at your console, you see all these errors kind of popping up there, right? Now, here is the error boundary. So we place our error boundary. Each error boundary is going to be for each individual item here. So we have it for the banking information, for the reward information, et cetera, et cetera. And here we can make our very, if you want to, unique messages here. I use the same one twice. But what's cool about this is you can actually customize through CSS the fallback error as well to display different things, to customize it, whatever it is that you want to do, but it's fully customizable in that respect. And so now if there is an error, it will say, oh, something went wrong. Sorry for the inconvenience, but it won't break anything else on the page, even if there's an error coming from an API or something else, right? So let's kind of see this in action. So now we've customized this error. We have our error still in the console, right? So things aren't fantastic. We definitely have some issues, but the customer is not faced with this issue anymore. They're now getting this error message saying error, oh, something went wrong. Sorry for the inconvenience, but everything else is still intact, leaving everything usable, scrollable, interacting, etc. I can go into my checking account then and see all my checking things. Maybe the reward point API will come back up in a couple minutes, or you could even customize this message to say something like, hey, something went wrong. Can you refresh the page? That should fix these issues, whatever it may be, whatever message you want to give out there. Or let's say, for example, when the API messes up, maybe there is something that you create where it notifies the team that's in charge. And you can say something like, our team has been notified of this issue. We're working on this. Please, we'll let you know whenever this goes back up or whatever it may be, right? So much confidence is built with this small thing as opposed to them just seeing a blank page and now thinking their money disappeared. It's a very small thing that really puts a lot of confidence in the entire process. Things like that make a big difference when it comes to the user experience, as well as pretty much anyone utilizing your application. Now, it isn't all sunshine and rainbow, folks. I know you just saw that said, I'm going to put error boundaries on everything. I'm going to go ahead and put an error boundary here and there. It's not all sunshine and rainbow. So let's talk about the areas where it doesn't necessarily solve all your problems, right? And there's 4 areas in particular. The errors that it does not catch are errors from event handlers, errors from asynchronous code. Any error that you get from server-side rendering, it's not going to catch at all. So that means everything that we're doing here is client-side, but if it's on the server side, it will not catch any of that. And errors thrown in the error boundary itself. It can catch errors from the children that it's associating itself with, meaning we wrap the error boundary and we place the component inside of there, right? So the way we wrapped error boundary and then we placed it on the banking information, then we placed error boundary and then we placed it in the reward information. But if the error is in the error boundary itself, it can't catch them. So it breaks. So that's the only 4 particular errors you need to pay attention to. Outside of that, it can catch anything else that you throw your way. So server-side rendering, I mean, you can kind of do something else in that respect, but outside of that, you're good to go when it comes to error boundaries and event handling. So that is the entire talk. It's condensed down so that way short, sweet, to the point. Hopefully you got some value out of that. And let me kind of stop presenting now. There's perfect. I didn't see any of the chat, by the way, so I'm seeing some messages now real fast. Hold on. This is so cool. This page really helped me understand. Sweet. Thank you. Error boundary and an error boundary. Yes. I will say one thing here. I've truly, truly enjoyed this evening. One message in particular that I got made this entire meetup completely worth it for me, where someone literally said they were thinking about quitting development and they have more confidence than ever right now. That means a lot to me. So thank you. And I'm glad that we were able to do something like that for you. One last thing that we're doing. We have our final team, the mobile team, that is going to be delivering, showing off their last project that they made. And when is the next meetup? So the next meetup is an in-person meetup. I shared the link. If you go to the meetup page, you should see that. That's on November 22nd. It is a Tuesday. It's in person. We've got so many hiring managers and recruiters and software developers from all over the city that are going to be there. Super, super excited about this. For those asking, where can we get this recording? We will upload it to our YouTube channel, Free Code Camp Dallas YouTube channel. If you go to our website here, hold on, let me copy this website link so that way you can have it. Where to go? Where to go? Here it is. I'm going to drop this website link in the chat, and you can go ahead and use that website, and you can kind of get all of our links. If you're in the Dallas area, highly recommend joining our Discord, or at least if you're in Texas. If you're not in Texas, I don't know why hopefully I'm the only one that sees my face doing that, but if not, everyone sees my face in like the most awkward position ever. But some of the smiles, I think everyone sees my awkward face, so that works. But one thing that I will say is, if you're in the Dallas area, highly recommend joining that Discord. If you're not in, or in the Texas area rather, but if you're outside of the Texas area, not a problem at all. I think one thing that you can do is, if you are looking for a more global Discord, highly recommend checking out mine. I know we have some people that are joining in from all parts of the world, some even from Africa. We have developers in there from that region, over 12,000 developers and growing. So definitely definitely a good moment. So without further ado, I'm going to give it to Scott to introduce the last team, so that way we can celebrate them. And yes, the community is for all developers. It's not just if you're on Free Code Camp. We like to celebrate Free Code Camp. I think many of us started on there, so we definitely love promoting them when we can. But it's definitely for everybody and everybody. We will also be doing a ton of meetups like this on various technologies as well, whether it's a Java, whether it's Golang. We have some talks about doing something related to Angular. We have something related to databases. So it's going to be all technologies and all kinds of events like this as well. But go ahead, John. Scott.
All right, thanks, Danny. Yeah. So for our last team, our team lead is